Well.
We're
Welcome back,
back.
everybody. It's been a long time. Uh, this is the Suffering Sports Fan Podcast. Welcome back. Uh, Look, we've been away for a long time. And why have we been away for a long time? Dad, you said it when we first started this podcast. Look, we might stop at some point. I think you said that in maybe the first episode. You said we're going to
I
stop at some
did.
point because this is going to be miserable. And we knew that coming into it. And we thought, the expectations for this Dolphins team were high enough to where even though they would make us suffer, we would be able to come on and talk about it. That was not the case because by week 3, we were already done. We were miserable. The offseason was
I think
pointless,
I,
and the
th- I
season had
think we
started
may have
off on a terrible note.
I think we may have stuck around till week 5 maybe. But yeah, I think we did about I want to say 5 episodes or 5 or 6 episodes.
Well, in those
We
episodes,
did do
regardless, we
we
only
did do a
got to see
few in
one
the
win.
preseason.
So,
We did do a few in the preseason, but
yes, we did.
it was a challenging one, right? We started to just get depressed and we didn't know when Tua was going to
Right.
come back, and then
Yeah.
and then sort of things happened. You were busy with school and other things going on, so it just sort of it became what it was. And we said we were going to do one as a recap, and boy, has there been a lot to recap. As Dolphin seasons go, this is one of those that perfectly exemplifies this podcast and why it's called what it is, because
Right.
this is if you were never a Dolphin fan and you became a Dolphin fan this year, welcome to every season for the last 25 years
Of all time,
That's
and
what
it's
this season
because our
was.
arena, our stadium is built on a Seminole Indian burial ground, and there is a curse over us. That is the long-standing curse, the rumor that is out there, which
Something
seems to be true because this is
before we
every
get
year.
into everything, something occurred to me in the middle of the season. I think I texted you maybe about it at some point, but I was like, why are we even in the AFC East? This thought popped into my head because we don't make sense in the AFC East. Every other team in that division is in the freezing cold Northeast where they play in the cold. All
And
the other
that would
teams
that okay, yeah,
in the
but would that
AFC
fix
South,
anything?
well, if you were in a division with Jacksonville
Yeah.
and the Colts and other teams that are closer, like if you played in a dome every year against the Colts, which we used to do, and if you played against Jacksonville, maybe we'd have a few easier paths to the playoffs. But never
Sure.
mind
Well,
that.
funny enough, we played both the Colts and the Jags this year, and we split those games. And so the Dolphins, let's jump ahead a little bit. So now we're back on the podcast. The season is done. The Dolphin season is finished. They ended the year off 8-9, which is one game under 500, and they missed the playoffs for the first time under Mike McDaniel. So you don't love to see the regression there, but a lot of things went wrong. And one of the first episodes we had when our spirits were higher, we went back and we predicted what the schedule for this upcoming season would be. Let's
Yeah,
pull that up because this was my
that's hilarious.
schedule prediction. You see a lot of green on there, a lot of W's. That
Funny,
did not
man.
happen. I said the Dolphins were going to go 13-4. Now, I would like to point out that I had the Dolphins going 6-2 at the end and losing that last game to the Jets, which did happen. Okay. So there was some correctness there. Now, where were the games that went the opposite way? Tua gets hurt in week 2 against the Bills on Thursday Night Football. I thought maybe the Dolphins could have overcame that. I had them splitting the season with the Bills. That did not happen either. They lost to both of them, but that week 2 loss, sure, that could have been a loss. I think we knew that going in. We were trying to be optimistic. The games we really thought we were going to win, as in the Dolphins, the Seahawks, the Titans, the Patriots, the Colts, right? Those 4 games. Now, the Dolphins end the year off 8-9. If you take away those four games as losses, actually the Patriots were a win, the Cardinals were a loss, so there's still 4 losses there. If you take away 4 losses, then you're not 8-9, you're 12-5, which is a lot more like what our schedule prediction would have been. If Tua doesn't go down with the injury, you probably beat the Seahawks, you probably beat the Titans, you definitely beat the Colts, and you probably, with more momentum and Tua being in the lineup, you probably beat the Cardinals and don't lose on a game-winning field goal. And your season looks a lot better than what it did at the end of the season. And you don't have to hope for a backup Kansas City Chiefs team to help get you into the playoffs at the end of the day. So this was what we thought the schedule would be. It did not go the Dolphins' way, and it was just a season of disaster and suffering and mid in the NFL. This was another average Dolphins season caused by significant injuries to the stars of the team. And it was just everything you did not want in year 3 with Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I think I had mine a little bit different. I had 13-4 also, which I think was funny.
There's yours. This is yours.
But I had I had us losing to on the road to the Packers and the Texans and the
Which both
Bills. I got
happened.
those right.
Which both happened.
I had
Yeah.
us losing to the Browns, but instead we lost to the Jets. So the second half of the season, I was pretty good.
Yeah, pretty right. You actually got all of them right. You did.
And if Tua doesn't get hurt, I'm not sure the first. Obviously, we would have lost to the Bills that second game anyway. But yeah, I'm with you.
Probably,
I think there's a strong case for winning those other ones. So,
look, and so then the conversation becomes, okay, is this an opportunity to rebuild? And now you're regressing. Well, not really, because Stephen Ross, literally the day after the season ended against the Jets, he put out a statement that said they're going to retain Mike McDaniel as head coach. They're going to keep Chris Greer, who's been with the organization for 25 years, and the team has had no success for 25 years. So that loyalty there with Stephen Ross has to be called into question. Why is he still keeping Chris Greer running the personnel on this team, and why is he keeping him in that position? Regardless, though, the case now is, and we just talked about it, if QB1 isn't out of the lineup for 5 weeks, you're probably looking at this team sitting in the wild card spot instead of fighting their way to get into the wild card spot in week 17. It's just an objective fact. It's a guy who, you could say what you want about him. He led the league in passing yards. He's capable of being a starting quarterback, and we know what his record is against bad teams. At that point in the year, the Seahawks weren't the Seahawks yet. The Colts were bad, and they ended up being pretty bad. They didn't make the playoffs either. And the Jets and the Patriots and all these teams, right? They weren't great football teams. He's capable of beating those teams.
No,
he needs to overcome those. Right.
We had one of the easiest schedules in the league, and we knew that sort of going in, and then we got lucky with teams like the Browns and the 49ers at the end not being good. And so that sort of helped us save face a little bit. I think on one hand, look, it's sort of every season where you're in it. Miami never really gets eliminated by week 7. They're always sort of in it until the end. So at least there was that, give you reason to watch. You never really felt like we were going to make the playoffs, but the other thing is I would like to see just one time, can we get some of the better teams and the harder games to be at home and not on the road in freezing cold at night? This feels like something where the league is sticking it to us all the time. We don't play the Packers at 1:00 here. We play them at 8:00 there.
And look,
the Texans was there. The Rams was there, although we didn't get any hard teams at home. Just give us a break once in a while, please. Is that so hard to ask?
No, it's not. It's not. And look, the Dolphins ended up missing the playoffs at the end of the day. There's nothing else that they could have done, unfortunately. And we'll see where the team's back at next season. We're gonna talk about it a little bit more as we continue on here. But seriously, when you talk about Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel, do you keep both of them? Do you let both of them go? Do you keep one and let one go? There needs to be a real conversation about that. And why the team is built the way that it is and why the team plays the way that it is, because it's been a constant theme, not only for the past 25 years since Chris Greer has been around the organization, but even with McDaniel. You thought there would be this kind of change in culture, and it looked like for a little bit last year that was the case, right? Finishing off the season strong and pulling through and making the playoffs with Tua, playing a full season. Not anymore.
Look, there's arguments to be made for you're invested in this whole group of people together. And so to keep the stability, let's just go one more year. Like they could say Tua was hurt. We get a few offensive linemen. Tua stops running
Yep.
around like an idiot, and you have a chance. So you want to make that argument. Okay, the reality, the way I see this sort of playing out, every every sort of regime that we've had sort of follows this same timeline. The first year or
Yeah.
two are good. Maybe you make the playoffs, you show something, and you go, okay, this team's going to grow. Third year sucks. You miss the playoffs. Things don't, oh, okay, let's keep them together for one more year. The fourth season is super awful, and the coach gets fired mid-season. So I sort of feel,
Well, we can only
unfortunately,
hope. We can only hope
that by
that that's
next
not the case.
season we're going to start off like 2-4 or 1-6, and Mike McDaniel gets fired midseason. That's sort of how
All
I
right.
see this playing out.
Well, all right. Well, we'll see.
And
We'll see. But well, yeah, we'll see. But either way, I mean, this is a good transition now because before we came on, we made a list of our top three things that were terrible about the year and top three positives from the year. Because even with all the negative and the suffering, there were a couple of positives to take away from it. But let's start with the negative first because those are what was clearly apparent. And you
so
got
the
to start with
number three.
yeah, yeah. You got to start with play
So
calling.
so I think before we get into this one, I think these all fall for me under the headline of off-season disaster.
Sure.
In looking back now, it's one of the worst off seasons the Dolphins have ever had, and we lost a bunch of great players. We did not shore up positions that needed shoring up, like offensive line and backup QB, and we did not get that extra wide receiver. We
Yeah.
let Andrew Van Ginkel and Christian Wilkins go. Like we
Yep.
brought in Poyer, who was terrible.
Yeah,
Like
you let Brandon Jones walk and Xavier Howard walk, and
Fuller,
the
Kendall
secondary was bad.
Fuller
Right.
was no good. Like it just
He was fine. He was
the off
always injured.
season.
But I mean, yeah, I know
The
he
off
was. Yeah.
season was just dreadful, and it is
Right.
basically what caused all of this. So you want to go into the third choice on the number three.
Yeah. So we came up with play calling, and look, we can talk about the personnel that ended up being on the field, whether you wanted them to be on the field or not. But McDaniel had to work with what he had. And we've talked about this before, these situations with McDaniel's play calling. Why are you running it in certain situations instead of passing it? And why are you passing it when you clearly should run it and get a yard, right? And this has been a thing for him this whole time, except this year, it was more apparent than not. Last season, the Miami Dolphins led the league in yards per play. They were constantly taking shots downfield. Tyreek Waddle, explosive plays, Achane, breakaway runs. Mostert had 20 touchdowns last year, right? It was the Dolphins' offense was rocking in year two with Mike McDaniel. And then in year three, the team literally led the league and was at the bottom of the league, excuse
At the
me, in
bottom.
yards per play. Every play was around or behind the line of scrimmage. Tua maybe averaged 2 downfield throws past 10 yards per game. Last year, he maybe had about 10 or 15 per game. There was constant shots down the field. McDaniel wouldn't let him throw down the field when he was there. The play action went away. They only run runs when they toss it back 10 yards or 5 yards and we lose yardage. There's never just regular handoffs anymore. I don't know what happened to running the football in the NFL. Every team's doing it, by the way. It's not just a McDaniel thing, but we happen to run it in situations more than not, and it causes us to be in really bad field position. And we only run screens to behind the line of scrimmage. There's no passing anymore. What every other team you watch, and you can point at the Rams, you can point to the Bengals, you can point to the Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr. getting wide open on every play. Players run slants and posts and get open. How come we can never do that? The play calling with Mike McDaniel, I can't even talk about it. It is the same thing week after week, and you sit there thinking about why is the offense the way that it is. And I could talk about this forever. But then specifically, you even need to point out the playing against the good teams. When you play against the Texans or the Packers or the Bills, simplify the playbook. Play football a smart way. You know this. You know how to run an offense, but consistently get out coached and fall short. And you cannot put your quarterback into scenarios where in places where he does not excel. And that's at time and time again, that is what Mike McDaniel does. Where on third down, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Jonnu Smith are not on the field. when he's calling.
Listen,
And that play on third down will be the only time all game where Tua throws down the field and none of his top targets are on the field. Why? It happens all the time.
that's one of many problems that make no
Mic
sense.
drop.
They looked at Jets game, and granted, Tua's not in the game, but I don't think it really matters. You intercepted the ball on the very first play from Aaron Rodgers. You have the ball inside the 10 or 15-yard line with the chance to score. You don't get a yard. So
Right.
you kick straight field. The play calls are terrible. And in one
Devon
of those
Achane breaks
situations,
away. Devon Achane breaks away on the next drive. We get the ball back. Devon Achane breaks away for a 65-yard run. Gets tripped up, almost scores, but he gets tripped up on the 2-yard line. You end up on the 17 and kick a field goal. How does that happen? And it's not just like in that one game; it's every game. There's multiple.
Look, and you had a running back. You had a quarterback that Tyler Huntley's strength is not throwing the ball; it's running, and they never had him scramble. And I have to know we'll never know the answers to this, but for example, there was like a 3rd and 2 inside the goal, inside one of those red zone chances. It was like a 3rd and 1 where he's backing up to throw, and there's a lane for him to run, and he would get the first down. And instead, he throws a terrible fade out of bounds to the end zone. That kind of thing, I'm confused by this. You had 1 yard to go with a quarterback who can't throw, and you're having him throw a difficult pass. That makes no sense. Is that the quarterback's decision? Is that Look, where is this coming from? And why is it constantly so hard to just get 1 yard? We are the worst team in getting 1 yard ever. And
they were last year too, even when the offense was great.
So, okay, that's a problem. I think a lot of this may be addressed by our number 2 biggest problem, which is the offensive line. The offensive line was every fan and every pundit knew going into this season our offensive line was bad. And Chris Greer stood in front of the press and laughed at everybody. You guys are overreacting. And we weren't.
He literally laughed and said, fine.
The only reason this offensive line went through games here and there where they looked good or didn't give up a sack or something like that is because Tua is so fast at getting rid of the ball. And the play calls are all within 5 yards like that. So there's no time for the defense to do anything. McDaniel, I think, knows this. That's why the offense was what it was. You need an offensive line that can extend plays and that will allow us to go back to play calling that we are better at. And you need to be able to run the ball. We cannot run the ball. And that's just where everything falls.
Right. Look, there is one real bright spot on the offensive line. Aaron Brewer, the center, who at the beginning of the year, week 1, him and Tua trying to get on the same page, snapping the ball, just those, the center quarterback exchange. But after that, I mean, he was phenomenal all year in both the run and pass game, just getting out of the pocket. He would run over guys, and he was incredibly hard to take down. I don't think he allowed a sack for the rest of the season after the rough start there. So he was phenomenal. But the rest of the offensive line, Armstead in and out of the lineup. Austin Jackson goes down early. He's out for the whole season. Liam Eichenberg, maybe the worst offensive lineman in the history of the Dolphins organization. And then the rotating cast of people at left guard, Robert Jones and Isaiah Wynn and Kendall Lamb getting in, and just this, and Patrick Paul subbing in for Armstead, just this constant rotation. There's no set offensive line. I mean, the best teams in the league have 5 guys that by some miracle happen to stay healthy all season long and all happen to be very good at their position. The Dolphins haven't found that yet. You let Robert Hunt walk in the offseason, a $100 million guard who didn't allow a sack all year for Bryce Young, even though the Panthers sucked, but they had a very solid run game. Chuba Hubbard, if you had him in fantasy, was scoring 25 points every week, top 10 fantasy back. And so the Panthers offense with Robert Hunt was sustainable, right? I mean, they could get the ball moving. The Dolphins offense couldn't get the ball moving. And that's sad. You can't let those players walk. You can't put money in other areas where you're going to get into trouble. You got to build up the offensive line. In their press conference today, Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer, when they were asked about it, Chris Greer said point blank, we got to invest in the offensive line now, and we know that.
Thanks for joining all of us.
You should have known. Like, we all knew it. Everybody knows, and we're not dumb. right? Like the depth on the offensive line was an issue. They had way more injuries on the offensive line than many other teams in the league. We can't hold that against Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel. And they truly believed that their offensive line was going to be good enough to hold up. And at points, it was okay. And that's partially due to the fact that when Armstead and Aaron Brewer were there, that was good enough against the crappier teams. But then when you're going up against the Bills or you're going up even against the Texans or whatever, like Tua was getting knocked down every play, and that can't happen. And for those quarterbacks who were not Tua that were behind center, I mean, guys that can't get the ball out. I mean, you got to protect those guys. You need to build up the offensive line just for any sort of case scenario, and it was not there this year.
Yeah, I think that it even more is important in our particular case because of what is our number one thing that went wrong and is a problem on the team, which is Tua getting hurt and not having a backup. So other teams, the good teams, Bills,
Yeah.
Ravens, Chiefs,
Mm-hmm.
Commanders, some of these
Yep.
other teams, they have quarterbacks that can, when the things break down, they can scramble and save
Yes.
so many drives, and they don't get hurt
Sure.
by running. And Tua,
Yeah.
bless him, cannot do that because the two times he
Sure.
tried to run this year, he
Yep.
ended up missing games and ruining the season. So
Yep.
he just doesn't slide. He's he needs to not run. And
Just don't run.
it's tough when you have a quarterback that cannot run, that you tell in this day and age to not scramble. It's really
Sure.
challenging. It happens to be that he's so good at just throwing and completing that,
Right.
okay, let's make sure he never runs again. But in order to do that, you need not just a good offensive line, the best offensive line. You need an
Yeah.
offensive line that runs the ball, that mauls people, that
Yeah.
gives him an extra couple of seconds to throw. For them
Right.
to just, it's honestly, for them to go into this season with this quarterback of all quarterbacks in the league
Yeah.
and not have a backup and an improved offensive line is a
Yep.
fireable offense, and it is why they should all be fired. Really.
Sure.
The fact that
Yep.
they get another
Yeah.
chance based on that is insane. But nevertheless,
Look, I mean, you know, again, don't want to talk about the Tua point too much. I think when he's healthy, he's up there with some of the other best quarterbacks, just in terms of how he throws the ball, and I think it's, I think it's very clear. But I mean, there were no other weapons out there for him to throw to. And the weapons that were on the field, he's McDaniel had him throw to behind the line of scrimmage for screen passes. I mean, there was no consistency from the offense for last year to this year. And then there's no good backup. I mean, Skylar Thompson was atrocious for the few couple games that he got in there. Tim Boyle couldn't throw the ball really well. He somehow did it better than Skylar Thompson. And then Jacoby Brissett, he finally came along at the end of the year when he
Tyler
randomly had to
Huntley.
get in the game. But who did I say? Jacoby
Tyler,
Brissett? My bad.
same
Tyler Huntley.
player. Really the same
Yeah,
player.
really the same player. But I mean, Tyler
And
Huntley comes in
he
and
was here. What's the difference?
yeah, no,
Um,
Tyler Huntley, I mean, he ended up playing all right in that Browns game, but I mean, you would have liked to see that earlier in the year, and it just didn't come together. Ultimately, look, they need to draft a quarterback this year. I don't care where in the draft. Brock Purdy was a seventh round draft pick. Just get a guy. Get a guy you trust to get in the game just in case in preseason. Let's have a guy out there who we can look at and say, wow, I don't care if he's throwing the backups. He looks comfortable throwing the football. Because even though Skylar Thompson went in a preseason game and he's going up against third and fourth, fifth strings, he never looked good. And I never understood why they weren't going out and getting a backup. Why you're not going out and signing Joe Flacco or Marcus Mariota or some of these other guys, just these backups, Carson Wentz, Trubisky's around the league who have done it, who have experience. If you're not going to go out and spend the money to get a competent backup, you need to draft a guy that looks comfortable.
you could have had just for example, you could have had Sam Darnold,
Right. You could have went and
and
got Sam Darnold. Right.
and then now Sam Darnold's leading into the playoffs. Maybe not. Who knows? But clearly competent, right? But more
Right.
than so.
So this was
Yeah,
clear. This was clearly the number one thing this year that was terrible. Tua going down was the worst thing possible that could have happened. The second worst thing is not having a backup, and that's why we combined these for our number one worst spot this
I
season.
think that's why. That's the only thing you're saying. This isn't one of those cases where everyone was healthy.
Yeah.
You invested on offensive line, everything was good, and you don't know why you lost. For example, the Bengals. You had the number one wide receiver in the NFL, most catches, most yards, most passing TDs. You had Burrow killing it, led the league in yards, the whole thing. You had two wide receivers that were awesome, a great offense. You had a guy that led the league in sacks. You didn't make the
Yeah.
playoffs. That's more confusing. That's almost like
Yeah.
what went wrong? The Dolphins you're
Right.
looking at here, you're going, okay, maybe if we get a good backup and a couple of offensive linemen, we don't run into the
Right.
same problem again. And so you say,
Right.
let's just keep everyone together and do that. Let's see if it works. I'm not so sure, but let's see if it works. Now, the positives. We have a few positives,
Yeah.
people
Well,
we
yeah.
want to highlight.
Right. Yeah. Let's go through the positives.
Okay.
So number three. This is you might be like, really? We're going to talk about Jason Sanders? Yeah, we'll get through this in a minute. But when you look at a team that had issues all year that fans had to watch and suffer through, and this team that even with Tua at points struggled to go down the field and just score a touchdown every once in a while, there was at least one player who was consistent all season long, Jason Sanders, who maybe missed a couple early in the year, but ended the year off on a 27 field goal streak, I believe. Dude didn't miss kicks when we needed them. They were always going through the uprights, and that's going to be the longest streak for any kicker in the National Football League headed into 2025. So, out of all of the MVPs on the team this year, the players that played the best consistently, game in and game out, you got to look at Jason Sanders and say, "Hey, dude, thanks for at least keeping us in some games when our offense and at points defense didn't come through." So thanks, Jason, for making some field goals this year and making us and for keeping
Also,
us in some games. For sure,
honorable
should have been
mention
a
to
Pro
our
Bowler this year.
honorable mention to our punter, who was
Sure,
also
sure.
pretty good this
Jake
year.
Bailey. Jake Bailey was
Jake
great this year.
Bailey,
He got some good
he
punts.
had
Yeah,
a pretty good season too.
we'll
Okay,
combine
number
this one
two, we're gonna
special teams.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, number two.
Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane, the two bright spots on the offense,
Yeah,
both
to
played
both. Yeah,
immensely well, and got to give
yep.
them their props.
Yeah,
Without them,
Devon
I don't know.
Chan. Look, Jonnu Smith. Look, Travis Kelce's the guy, and what maybe arguably the greatest tight end of all time, and we know how popular he is. Jonnu Smith was better than him in every statistical category this year. More yards, more touchdowns. Had the best tight end for a Dolphin in program history. He clearly should have been in the Pro Bowl this year. It's a shame that he wasn't, and I feel for him. And I know he was pretty vocal in the media that he was upset about that. What a tremendous year from Jonnu Smith when Tyreek did not show up in big games, and when Waddle was in and out of the lineup with injuries, and the Dolphins don't have a third receiver. Jonnu Smith was the guy. There were a couple drives late in games, the Rams game, that first game against the Jets. And it was literally, okay, we're in overtime. Here, Jonnu Smith, boom, 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 5 passes in a row, get us down the field and score a touchdown. And that's exactly what you want from a tight end. And it's great that hopefully we have that now for the future. He is up there in age, but hopefully he got a few good years left in him. And I'm happy that he's on the team. And as for Devon Achane, the Dolphins' run game sucked this year, and they couldn't run the ball. He could a little bit, but where he was really a bright spot was as a fourth receiver next to Waddle, Tyreek, and Jonnu. I mean, he caught 10 plus passes a game. If you had him in fantasy football, you're like in a PPR league, you're like, dude, this is awesome because he had a running back.
I don't know what happened.
That was a guaranteed 15 points a game.
I don't know what happened to Mostert. I know he had the fumbles, and then I guess he had an injury. The offense
The
would have
fumbles were
worked a
bad,
little
yeah.
bit better. The offense would have worked a
Yeah.
little bit better if he was the main guy on first and second down, and Devon is the third down guy, and they've sort of mixed it up. But nevertheless, he was really he was good. And our
Yeah.
number one highlight,
Either
I
way,
guess,
they were the best. Yeah.
I think it's going to go to the defense, or at least
Yeah.
most of the defense.
No,
there were a few weak spots, but
overall, you got to look at Anthony Weaver, new defensive coordinator for this team. Vic Fangio did not do a great job last year with McDaniel. The defense, was out of whack. And the offense was great. And then this year it kind of flips. The defense was probably really good all year, offense inconsistent. Anthony Weaver, and no one expected them to be as good as they were this year with the struggles that they had last year and the personnel changes on defense. Anthony Weaver had the Dolphins defense as a top 5 defense by the end of the year. They were top 10 in points allowed. And they did a really good job at opposing other quarterbacks, not named Aaron Rodgers, to having good games. And so, I mean, you got to give credit where credit is due. The defensive line, Calais Campbell, Chop Robinson, the rookie who was spectacular and led all rookies in sacks. He should be a defensive rookie of the year candidate, but he's not going to because Miami sucked. And he was phenomenal. Zach Sealer, who it is an absolute sham. He is not a Pro Bowler this year. He was better than every defensive tackle. He's just not as big of a name. He's an undrafted guy, but is arguably one of the best, a top 5 defensive tackle in the league. I mean, he was spectacular this season. Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson, 2 new linebackers who Anthony Weaver and Mike McDaniel brought to the team this year to be the Mikes on defense. They were great. Jordan Brooks leading the team in tackles. He was everywhere every time you needed him to be. Jalen Ramsey still played good this year. And Kohu played good this year, came up clutch in a couple of big games with pass deflections. You got to be happy with the guys that you had out there. You would have loved to have retained Andrew Van Ginkel, potentially Christian Wilkins, built up that offensive line. You hate to see Jalen Phillips go down. The secondary, as poor as it was, but even with all of the things that went wrong, when the offense was down, the defense, and specifically those 5 or 6 players we named, were the only people keeping us in games.
We were supposed to have had Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips back this year on top of all of this. That would have been lethal, really, if you think about it. So I don't know what to expect from those guys next year. It's going to be hard to expect Jalen Phillips to get back to what he was after all these injuries, but wish him
if anyone
can
do it,
it's him. And really hope he can.
I mean, Chop Robinson was great, and the defense was really good. You have to be happy. Hopefully, Anthony Weaver doesn't go. You want to be able to build on top of this in year 2 under him, and that's number 1. Yep.
Weakest part of the defense was definitely the safeties. Javon Holland took a step back, and Jordan Poyer was terrible. So I think if I'm doing a draft thing, I think you got to focus on safeties, secondary, or at least the safety position, and then like we've been talking about the whole podcast, offensive line. Those are the main weaknesses. So after the Jets game, everybody knows by now that Tyreek Hill came out and said that he sort of wants out, and I guess he changed his profile pic to look like Antonio Brown, but now it's back to being a member of the Dolphins as of today.
It is. That's huge. That's huge.
So what happens with Tyreek?
All right. Well, he's a clown, and Alec Ingold, the Dolphins fullback, when he was asked about it yesterday in exit interviews by the media, he said, "Look, I'm not going to read too much into it. It's just Tyreek being Tyreek." And look, he's right. At the end of the day, I mean, we don't know, right? Like, Tyreek, at one point on social media, his bio was like, "I like to start shit and then leave." That's literally what his bio was. And that's kind of what he did. He made a fool of the Dolphins on social media, said some stuff he probably shouldn't have said because he was upset at McDaniel or whatever, the fact that the team didn't make the playoffs, and he was emotional. And now his profile picture is back to being a Dolphins player. And apparently today, Mike McDaniel said him and Tyreek were good. Tyreek took himself out of the end of that Jets game because he was frustrated. And they got into it a little bit, and McDaniel says they're fine now. We don't know if any of that's true. We don't know if any of what Tyreek said is true or if he's going to be gone. But look, at the end of the day, has he showed up in a single big game? No. Does he drop way too many passes in big games? Yeah. I mean, Tyreek, there were multiple points this year where Tua threw him a really good ball, dropped the ball, or didn't break away from a tackle that maybe last year he probably takes 80 yards to the house. He runs backwards a lot. And he's not on the field sometimes. And I know he was dealing with a wrist injury this year, and sure, we can let that be an excuse. But next year, if he comes back and he continues to play the way that he has the past few seasons with this Dolphins team, regardless of who the quarterback is, let him walk. That's my opinion. I mean, he's one of the all-time greats. I mean, he's an offensive player of the year, 8-time Pro Bowler, whatever it is, should get 1,000 yards every season. One of the fastest players to ever play the game. McDaniel doesn't use him the right way. And when he does use him the right way in big games, he doesn't show up. So hopefully he stays. Hopefully the team gets back on the same page. But if for some reason you can't, go get picks for him and send him off and let him do his thing because it hasn't worked here.
I'm okay either way.
That's simple.
If you can mend fences and he comes back for one more year, it's always good to have a Tyreek Hill on your team. If we can trade him for a couple of draft picks, honestly, I'm not going to cry about it either. So That's where I am with it. It was fun,
Look,
but he's fun
right.
when he's scoring 80-yard touchdowns, not when he's catching 3 passes for 35 yards. That's not fun.
Yeah. Well, it's not even
And
that. I mean, a lot of people this week have been comparing him and Jimmy Butler, both saying that they want out of their respective franchises in Miami. And I would point out and say the difference between the two is, I don't really feel like Tyreek Hill had a performance like a Jimmy Butler 56 point night in against the Bucks to beat the number one seed in the playoffs. Like he did not pull through in any way. I mean, the first play that always comes to mind is that Eagles game last year. It was Monday Night Football or something, or Sunday Night Football, and Tua throws a perfect ball to Tyreek and just dribbles it out of his hands. And I mean, literally couldn't have been a better catch. Against the Bills game last year at the end of the season to end off the year. If the Dolphins win that game, they win the division, and Tyreek hits him right in the hands, just goes straight through. I mean, there are so many of those moments with Tua behind center, throwing good balls. And look, Tua's not a perfect quarterback. No one is. Everyone underthrows a pass every once in a while. But in the big moments when Tua does happen to make a significantly good throw that can benefit the team and put his wide receiver in a good position to succeed, Tyreek Hill does not, complete the job on the other end. He never has, as long as he's been in a Dolphins uniform. The only play that he did this year was week 1, where the Dolphins were down against the Jaguars and he took a pass 80 yards to the house. We did not see that again. We did not see that similar play again. Nothing like that for the rest of the season, regardless of
it's
who was
just,
behind center. And it was a shame. And it was
look,
terrible. So
I think at
I
the
see
end,
I see the both sides of it. I see the both sides
yeah,
of it.
yeah, I
If
agree.
McDaniel's not going to use him correctly and Tyreek is upset about it, send him off. I'm not worried. But I'm also not worried because he hasn't showed up. So it's both, and I see both sides. You want to have Tyreek here, but if you're not going to use him correctly, I don't care either way.
It all comes down to the offensive line getting fixed and being good, and Tua staying healthy and being smarter with his body. And I think that that's 2024 in a nutshell.
That's
Who are
2024.
your picks
Yeah.
who are you picking for the Super Bowl?
I think right now you got to go. You got to go Lions and Chiefs. I mean, I don't want the Chiefs to be in there, but I mean, they went 15. They went, what they do again this year?
15
15
and
and
2,
2.
the loss to Denver. Yeah.
Yeah, they went 15 and 2 without scoring 30 points in a single game. That like, regardless of what you want to say about their offense, the defense is consistent and they don't make mistakes. Another thing with this Dolphins team, real quick, in 2024, the false start penalties, the delay of game penalties, the unnecessary roughness calls, and the personal foul calls and being stupid when you don't need to. When will the discipline get there? Because it is not here. It hasn't been there under McDaniel. I don't know
No.
how they're going to fix it, but it is always constantly bad and always happens to show up in the biggest moments too. So the penalties need to stop. But either way, the Chiefs are a team that are the epitome of consistent. They don't make mistakes. Say what you want about the refs and how they help them in games. They put themselves in positions to exceed more often than not. That's why the Chiefs are going back, unless Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson have anything to say about it. And I hope
I'm
one of them do,
going
but I'm not
I'm
sure they
going
will.
Ravens. I'm going Ravens, Lions. And I hope that's what it is. I really hope that it's not the Chiefs. And I feel like it's Lamar Jackson's year. But
I think we're
we'll
going to see the
see.
Eagles compete. I think we're going to see the Eagles compete for it too. Saquon and them. I think they're going to be hard to stop. But either way, maybe we see the Dolphins there next year. We can only hope.
All right. Sorry for missing so many weeks, but I think this is basically a recap of what it would have been all those other weeks we were missing.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
we'll see you next year on the Suffering Sports Fan podcast. And, yep, you can follow us on here. See ya. Bye bye.
Yep.